All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we are doing a deep dive into something really interesting. It's a recent interview with Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas. And what's really fascinating about this one is the timing. It
Yeah.
comes just 8 days into this new presidential term.
Wow. Yeah,
That's got to be a crazy time.
it is, and she's coming fresh off of her own reelection.
Wow.
So she's offering some pretty unfiltered takes on this new administration.
Yeah, it's electric. You can just feel it sort of in the air when you're watching this interview.
Yeah.
This whole flurry of executive actions and, legal battles that are brewing.
Absolutely. And she doesn't hold back. Right away, she calls the new president a dictator.
Yeah.
She even quotes his own campaign rhetoric back to him.
Yeah, and it is really interesting considering that that was part of his platform was that he was going to come in and really shake things up
Right.
and take decisive action. And, she's sort of saying like, all right, well, this is what that looks like.
In practice. So let's see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, let's unpack this a bit. One of her biggest concerns is this attempt by the new president to freeze funding that's already been approved by Congress.
Yeah.
She calls this a direct challenge to the power of the purse. Can you maybe give us some more background on that?
Yeah, so the power of the purse is this really core principle in our Constitution that gives Congress the ultimate control over government spending,
Okay,
not the president. And so historically, it's been this really major check on executive power.
I see.
So, going back years and years, if a president wanted to fund a war or some big program, they had to go through Congress.
So she sees this as the president exceeding his authority then.
That's her argument. And she's not the only one who's saying this. She even brings up the recent Supreme Court ruling on the TikTok ban as a potential indicator of how this might play out
Right.
legally. Because remember, the Supreme Court blocked the president from just unilaterally overturning this ban that had been signed into law by the previous administration.
Yeah, that was big news. So is she suggesting this could face a similar legal challenge?
It's possible. And, to understand why this is such a big deal, we really have to look at the potential fallout of this.
Okay.
Because she lists programs that could be affected: Head Start, Meals on Wheels, SNP benefits, even things like rural electric funds and infrastructure projects.
Wow.
It's not just, line items in a budget. It's actually like lifelines for communities all over the country.
That's a good point. We're talking about early childhood education,
Mm.
food security for seniors, even just basic utilities and jobs.
Exactly. And it's not just that immediate impact, down the road. Think about like infrastructure projects that could stall economic growth.
Wow.
Communities could be vulnerable in the long run.
And she also talks about, she's not just talking about policy here. She shares this anecdote about her own hairstylist who's expressing anxiety over all of these changes.
I know, it's so real.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that these things really are affecting people on a very personal level. It's not just this abstract political debate.
And it's interesting how she goes from, being a lawmaker to almost giving legal advice to people. She tells people, carry your documentation, stay safe. It's almost like a warning that things could get worse.
Yeah.
Like, be prepared.
It's like she's speaking from her experience as an attorney, right?
Yeah.
Giving practical advice to people who are feeling very uncertain right now.
Yeah. And there's a definite sense of urgency. And it's not just about the funding freezes. It's this whole range of issues, especially when it comes to civil rights.
Yeah, she is a huge advocate for the LGBTQIA plus community
Yeah.
and expresses a lot of concern about the new administration's policies and the rhetoric that they're using. She talks about, diversity, equity, inclusion, this whole DEI thing. But it seems like that term has almost become weaponized in a way
Yeah.
to kind of dismiss any effort towards equality.
Yeah, she's saying that it's all connected.
Oh.
The attacks on DEI, the attacks on affirmative action, the economic policies, that it's all part of this larger pattern.
Right. And that pattern being a deliberate strategy of division.
Yes.
She talks about, starting with using trans rights as a wedge issue, then you move on to immigration and so on.
Mhm.
This is like a very classic divide and conquer
Yeah.
tactic.
Yeah. She even references a conversation she had with Lucy Baines Johnson, LBJ's daughter,
Oh, wow.
about the courage that it took to pass the Voting Rights Act.
Wow.
So she's sort of calling on leaders today to have that same kind of courage, to defy party lines and do what's right, even if it's unpopular.
Yeah, that's powerful. Connecting those struggles of the past to the challenges that we're facing today. And it just underscores how important it is to stand up for these fundamental rights, even when it might cost you personally,
Absolutely.
to do the right thing.
And it's interesting how she ties that to like a modern critique.
Yeah.
especially of her own party.
Yeah.
She does not hold back in discussing, like, the Democrats' messaging problem.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty refreshing to hear a politician be so candid, about their own
Yeah.
side.
And she argues that Democrats get bogged down in, like, policy details,
Yeah.
and they kind of overwhelm people with information instead of, like, connecting with them on, like, an emotional level.
Yeah, it's a classic trap, you know? Especially now when everyone has such short attention spans.
Right.
It's not enough to just be right.
Right.
You have to know how to persuade people. You have to be relatable. And she seems to get that.
She does. And she even calls out Democrats for not using things like podcasts
Yeah.
enough, which I thought was interesting. She's like, this is how you reach people where they are. She even started her own podcast.
Well, it shows she's willing to adapt.
Mm.
She's trying to break out of these traditional ways of communicating and meet people on their own terms. I think that's really smart.
Yeah. And she gives some specific advice, too. She says, focus on just 3 key messages that resonate with people's everyday lives.
Yeah.
Engage more on social media. And even going to, like, unexpected places like hunting and fishing magazines.
Whoa, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's not really like a typical audience you'd think of for a Democrat. So it's about breaking out of that echo chamber, right?
Yeah.
Go to where people are.
Yeah. And she's not just talking about communication strategies. She also emphasizes this grassroots organizing, like going into communities and listening to their concerns, not just, showing up when you want their vote.
Yeah, she talks about building genuine relationships, actually understanding people's needs and what they want, and, demonstrating that you're committed, not just showing up every 4 years.
Yeah, and it all goes back to this courage thing,
Yeah.
right? Not just courage to stand up for your beliefs, but courage to listen and to learn and to adapt.
And to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of humility, and self-awareness. And you don't always see a lot of that in politics.
Yeah. So she acknowledges this term is going to be really tough.
Yeah.
I mean, she even says, I'm just trying to stop the bleeding right now.
Oh, wow.
But even with that pessimism, she outlined some of her top priorities.
It's like she's being realistic
Yeah,
about how hard it is, but she's not giving up.
exactly.
She's not letting it stop her.
Yeah. And one of her top priorities is criminal justice reform,
Okay.
especially, with the president's past legal troubles.
Right.
She's pushing for this Democracy Restoration Act,
Yeah.
which would restore voting rights for people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system.
Wow. That's a really fundamental issue, right? The right to vote is just so basic
Yeah.
to a democracy. And denying that to anyone, especially based on past mistakes, really undermines the whole system.
Right. It goes back to that courage thing.
Yes.
Challenging the status quo, advocating for people who've been silenced.
Absolutely. And it's also worth noting she thinks there's potential for like bipartisan support on certain things, like fentanyl legislation. Yeah. And that's encouraging, right? Especially when everything feels so divided these days. It shows there's still some common ground there.
Right.
Maybe it's possible to come together and address these problems.
Yeah. But she doesn't, sugarcoat the reality. She talks about the gridlock in Congress and just how divided our society is.
Yeah.
But she also doesn't give in to despair.
That's what makes her so inspiring. It's a message of hope, but it's grounded in reality. Like she sees the darkness,
Right.
but she still sees the stars.
Yeah. And that leads to one of the most powerful parts of this interview where she discusses immigration. And she talks about the fear in her community, this anxiety surrounding potential mass deportations, and the uncertainty that families are facing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to hear those stories.
Right.
It makes you realize the human cost of all this.
Yeah.
Like there are real people's lives at stake here.
And she doesn't just offer sympathy. She gives actual advice.
Right.
And resources. She talks about organizations like LULAC and the ACLU who are on the front lines of this.
Yeah.
And she urges people to know their rights, to get legal help,
Yeah.
to stay informed.
Yeah. It's not just words, right? It's like she's giving people an actual roadmap to get through this.
Yeah. And there's this one moment that really stuck with me where she paraphrases Kamala Harris's concession speech. She says, "The only time we see stars is in darkness.
Oh, wow.
This is our time to shine."
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. It's like finding that hope, when things feel so bleak. And that seems to be like the theme of this whole interview.
It is, yeah. She's a realist, but you can tell, like, deep down,
Right.
she's very hopeful and resilient. And it's kind of contagious,
It is. She doesn't shy away from the hard stuff. She criticizes her own party.
Yeah.
She talks about the fear that people are feeling.
Yeah.
But she always comes back to this idea that we can make things better.
Right. It's like she's holding on to those core values,
Right.
democracy, justice, equality. She wants all of us to remember those and like actually live up to them.
Yeah. It's interesting to contrast her style with the new president
Yeah.
because he's all about like big pronouncements and sweeping statements.
Yeah, he's very much big picture.
Right? And she's focused on the details. Like, what's the actual impact going to be on people?
It's like she's bringing that lawyer's mindset to it, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about every angle, building a case.
Exactly. And you see that in her work as a lawmaker, too. She's not just reacting.
Yeah.
She's thinking strategically.
Yeah.
Building those coalitions.
Mhm.
Looking for where she can make a difference.
She's a doer. She's not just talking.
Yeah. You know, I think what really stood out to me was her authenticity. She's not afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
To say, hey, I'm struggling with this too, or this is frustrating. And I think that makes her relatable.
It does. It's not something you see a lot in politics,
Mm.
but it's really refreshing.
Right.
It makes you feel like she gets it.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this question that she poses.
Mhm.
How can we, as citizens, contribute to a more just and equitable society?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
But it's something we should all be thinking about.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about it's about doing something. Like, what are we passionate about? What can we actually do to make a difference?
Yeah. And I think her interview gives us some ideas.
Mhm.
It's about looking for those bright spots, even when things are tough,
Mm-hmm.
holding on to our values, speaking up for what we believe in, and never giving up.
Well said. Couldn't have put it better myself. And, if you're looking for more deep dives like this, be sure to subscribe to the show. We're going to keep bringing you these conversations that, hopefully make you think and inspire you to make a difference.
Thanks for listening, everybody.